so you can hear the video. It's just a short video to explain something about the project.
IFR for NPO is a 5-year initiative to develop the first ever internationally applicable financial reporting guidance for non-profit organisations. It's coordinated by Humentum and the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. You probably know that businesses have international financial reporting standards, and governments have international public sector accounting standards. But the not-for-profit sector has no equivalent. This undermines the consistency and usefulness of financial reports and ultimately harms the sense of trust and accountability that is so central to its effectiveness. The current system is also inefficient, with duplication of effort for both NPO and funders in meeting multiple and at times conflicting financial requirements. An academic study in 2014 received responses from 179 countries. 72% of respondents agreed that an international standard for NPOs would be useful. So, the IFR4 NPO project is answering this call by engaging a wide range of stakeholders. The new guidance will command support from the accounting community and NPOs, as well as those that fund and regulate them. The guidance is being developed in a technically rigorous 3-step process, involving a consultation phase and development of an exposure draft, with final guidance available from early 2025, with the goal that at least 10 countries will use the guidance by 2030, with more to follow. The project has a technical advisory group involving national standard setters from every continent and an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. And the practitioner advisory group helps us ensure the guidance will meet users' needs. The founding funders share our vision for this game-changing project. We have the opportunity of a generation. We can increase accountability and transparency while reducing inefficiency in the current system.
Thanks, Sam. So I hope you all found that useful and get some idea of how really important this is. I travel around the world talking about financial reporting, talking about good performance, talking about good governance in non-profit organizations. And everywhere I go, there's this cry that can we have something that's consistent? Can we have something that makes sense for everyone to understand? And I think that's really quite important, particularly for our external reporting, because we're really living in a global world and we really need to be very connected in this whole area. Many of you are connected with international funders, with international donors. We know that the new FCRA Act is going to make that a lot more difficult. But generally, you're going to have to be able to make sure that your financial statements and your reporting tell your story. Tell the story of the great work that your organizations are doing and how you really need to be supported. So one question that often arises is, what type of financial reports are we talking about with this project? So you can have many different types. So you have your whole system here where you've got your transactions, your accounting systems, and then you produce different types of reports. All the transactions that you do, you're required to put through your accounting system, whether you've got a manual system or very complex enterprise system, or maybe just simply Excel accounts. And the reports you produce are also different in their simplicity or their complexity. Some are completely internal, so that's what you would call maybe your management information. I like to talk about it as being knowledge rather than information, because too many of us produce masses and masses of data rather than having the knowledge for the decision making which we have to take for our organizations. Then, of course, you've got reports to donors and funders. And again, donors and funders ask for their reports in different formats because they can't see any one consistent format that they should be using and asking for it. But most importantly, you produce your, what we call your general purpose financial statements. But really, that's your annual audited accounts or your accounts that you distribute to your members, your supporters, etc. And this project is actually focused on the general purpose financial statements and also the accompanying narrative reports. Now, it's very interesting. If you look at international financial reporting standards or IPSAS or whatever, they talk about the numbers part of the accounts and the reports. And this might sound like heresy coming from an accountant and an auditor, but the numbers only tell you part of the story. What's really important is the narrative report. And that puts some flesh onto the skeleton, onto the bones of the numbers, and really brings the numbers to life. And in the UK, we've got this thing called the SORP, the Statement of Recommended Practice. It's called recommended practice, but actually it's mandatory through other bits of legislation. And in 1992, when we first decided to do this, there was some other small SORP, but that was more like a statement of rare practice rather than a statement of recommended practice. Nobody was following it, and it was really like the Wild West. And I was asked to join this group to help produce this SORP, the Statement of Recommended Practice. And when I said, how long for? And they said, oh, you just need to give up about 3 months of your time working on this report. And 22 years later, after many iterations of this SORP, which we had, one after the other each time financial reporting standards change, because we had to align to international financial reporting standards, we had to produce new SORPs. And our last one was produced in 2015. So what we're hoping is that we won't have to have our own national standards, which are based on standards which weren't produced for the not-for-profit sector, standards which were produced for the private sector. So really what we're doing is we're focusing on your general purpose financial statements, and that's what you're going to be using. Also, Humentum is working on another project alongside this, and that is to harmonize donor project reporting formats. So between the two of these, you will have your donor reports and your external reports having some sort of framework which is recognized hopefully across the world. So now we're talking about stakeholders and which stakeholders are being considered for the projects. So, you've got your users, you've got your preparers, and you've got your auditors. Well, let's just understand that. The first group is your users. That's, maybe members of your committees. People like you are users also, and you also are preparers. So you've got the donors, your regulators, your charity commission, your clients, the people you support, your the public. When I talk about the term stakeholder, I use it very widely. I think about anyone who is affected by or can be affected by what your organization is doing. So even your beneficiaries might be your stakeholders. So you've got some sort of area of users, the wider stakeholders, but then you also have your preparers. This is maybe your accountants and everybody else. But to make sure we're capturing these people, we have what we call a donor reference group. So we're making sure that the donors also feed into the standard. So we are addressing their concerns, addressing what they want to see, and actually giving them some guidance. So you don't have, many different audits and many different reports. I know when I travel around the world, people talk to me about death by audit and death by financial reporting. I was in Kenya earlier in the year, and people were saying to me, we produce 15 different financial reports for different donors, for different people. So making sure we get some sense around this will be really important. So your nonprofit organizations themselves, you're the preparers. You're making sure you prepare your accounts in a particular way. We've got large donors, particularly influential donors, but then you've got your assurance providers, people like me and people like others in this room, the auditors, your other accountants who sign off on your financial statements. So really what we're trying to do is making sure that all these groups, the first group, the users, the preparers, and the auditors who provide assurance about whether the financial statements present a true and fair view, are all aligned. And they are often aligned at the top end of it, so that will be organizations like, your chartered accountants, your auditors, who are providing you with guidance about how you put your financial statements together. This will be guidance for them. This will be something which will be common across the board. So when you produce, if you're an organization, I don't know, if you're CRY India and you're producing accounts, somebody in the UK or the US or in Australia or Thailand can have a similar format and they understand what's happening with your organization. Right, so moving on, what are we trying to deliver with this project? So what change are we trying to get to? So we've got a number of current problems. There's no international financial reporting standard for nonprofit organizations. We have to sort of muddle along with using financial reporting standards, which are done for private sector or the public sector. There's no consistency. We've got inconsistent financial reporting. So how one organization recognizes its income, or one organization presents something, doesn't meet the funders' needs. What also it leads to is actually extra costs. If you don't have national standards, you're going to have costs which are expensive, often duplicating processes for due diligence, financial reporting, and also for your auditors. So when you put in a grant application, they ask you to send your financial statements. If the financial statements are not in a format that they're used to seeing or used to understanding, sometimes they may just put your application to one side. So this lack of clarity and consistency ultimately reduces the transparency of the sector. And it makes funders and regulators nervous. They're worried about many things. For example, lots of funders say to me that they're worried about double dipping, claiming the same amount from different organizations. They want to be able to tie back their funding to financial statements. They want to be able to see what you're doing in a consistent way. So we're hoping that this is going to provide a solution. So we're hoping that it's going to be adopted by different funders, and we've already aligned with a number of the big funders who are also supporting this financially and also supporting it and saying they will require their grantees to follow this. So whether you like it or not, sooner or later, this is the same thing as happened with our SORP, you're going to have to align to something which is common globally. Yes, of course, there will be your own country requirements, and that will, of course, have to take precedence, and different countries will have to decide whether to adopt or align to the alliance, and how they would be requiring the nonprofit organizations within their countries for following it. So we really think that this is something that's going to work well. The future outcomes and benefits are going to be really great. First of all, you're going to have increased trust. Trust in our organizations is really important. When people think that they've got good reporting, good financial statements, good auditing standards, covering the same sort of things, it includes the opportunity for you to be able to align yourself with benchmarks of trust, of honesty, of transparency around the world. NPOs are able to demonstrate capacity, that if they're producing their accounts in a particular way, they're able to show what they're doing. So then rather than just having a long list of things like salaries, wages, postage, mail, office premises, you will be actually showing what you're doing. You'll be able to show what your work is doing and how much it's costing. So childcare is costing this much. Environmental work we're doing is costing that much. Teaching is costing that much. So funders will be more readily able to assess the not-for-profit organizations that they're working with. And of course, if auditors are working to one standard, then your audit should be of a higher quality and should also be able to cost less. So really what we're trying to do is engage with a whole range of people. For NPOs applying this guidance, it means that they will be better able to demonstrate their capacity, as I've said. But one of the really important outcomes from this project, separate from the guidance itself, is the creation of a global community of stakeholders able to engage and collaborate to solve our sector-wide issues on reporting, but our sector-wide issues on other things. All of you on this webinar are change makers. You are people who are influencing, who are changing the way we do things. Well, we're people who are working for civil society, and that's really quite important. Ultimately, we believe that this guidance will contribute to more resilient and accountable sector. You'll be able to see what your problems are, you'll be able to see how other organizations are doing things, and it'll allow you to be in a better position to generate the right ask to actively get funds for your really important work and really important projects. So, who is delivering this project? What's behind this project? Well, it kicked off some years ago. I remember we've been talking about this now for over 3 years. We got together with the International Financial Reporting Standards Board. We had a whole bunch of standard setters in a room at SIPFA's office some years ago. But now the project is being implemented by 2 organizations. The first one is Humentum, and Sam is leading the project from Humentum. Humentum is a global association. It convenes non-profit organization professionals and inspires sector-wide coverage. Many of you will have heard of MANGO, Management Accountants for NGOs, or Inside NGO. And these organizations came together, merging, I think it was now 3 years ago, 2017, to form Humentum. And then we have SIPFA. SIPFA is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. It is itself a non-profit organization. It's a registered charity in the UK. It's one of my clients. We do the audit of SIPFA. And SIPFA is UK-based with a standard-setting role for local government and also charities, but also plays an important role as an international convener, bringing together public sector organizations around the world. Both Humentum and SIPFA are themselves non-profit organizations. So bringing together these different things allows these 2 organizations to bring together their connections, whether it's with non-profit organizations and funders on the Humentum side, and SIPFA, standard setters, and the accounts and auditing community. So we had to get some seed funding for this organization, and we're really grateful to both the Ford Foundation and the Open Societies Foundation for the initial kickoff funding for this organization to be able to do what it's trying to do. So what we also have is we've got 2 groups. We've got the Technical Advisory Group, and this is made up of standard setters from 5 continents. So you've got standard setters from around the world, who set accounting standards, and they come behind this, and this means that this will ensure some sort of consistency with their own national standards, but also ensure that the standards will be adopted. So the Practitioner Advisory Group, which I'm a member of, and Tejas, who's also on the webinar, Tejas is representing India on the Practitioner Advisory Group, will be working with the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, to make sure we're keeping them on the straight and narrow, and that they're not just making things become too technical and we can't apply them. So we're going to be the ones who are saying, well, this works, this doesn't work, these are the things you should be covering. Well, the language you're using here is a little vague and little, let's be a little more, less technical, let's be a little more usable. And information about each member of the Technical Advisory Group and the Practitioner Advisory Group can be found on the project website. So the project is fully transparent. We publish our minutes, we publish our discussions. I would really ask you to engage with this website as soon as you can. So how and when? How are we going to do this? We've got a number of phases, and it looks like it's a really long and dragged out process. And I was the one who was kicking and scrambling and saying, let's do it faster and quicker. But actually now I'm converted because I can see the input that's necessary. We've looked at why this project is important. I've also talked to you about what the project is and who the partners are. Really now we need to look at the timescales, the how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. We're going to implement this in 3 phases. Phase 1 is the consultation phase. And that we're going to produce a consultation paper. We've been looking at drafts of this, and this will present questions for structured input from all of you and from all the other wider stakeholders that we talked about when we talked about who. We'll talk more about this consultation process paper later on. Sam will explain more about it and how it's going to work. And we really want you to engage with it, because this is your chance to make sure that the standards for your sector, for our civil society organization, meets the requirements that you think is important. Phase 2 is the development phase, where we're going to analyze this feedback that comes in, and we expect lots of feedback because this is a global standard. And then we will look back at the feedback from the consultation and use that as an evidence base to develop the draft guidelines. Now, we're going to put that into an exposure draft, what we call an ED. And that exposure draft will go out, and we're expecting a lot of comment, and because we already know that different parts of the world do different things in different ways and account for it differently, and each person will be trying to say why, how the way their country does it is the best way to do it. And we're going to have to moderate that. And that is the third phase. It'll take stock of the feedback from the exposure draft, and we'll put through the changes which we think are necessary before launching the final guidance. This is really important. You know, if you don't do this consultation, you can get it really badly wrong. In 1992, I was asked to advise the House of Lords Committee in the UK, which was looking at the Charities Act 1992. And because government at that time hadn't consulted, it became the most changed act in the history of that parliament. Because, you know, when we looked at it, when we started talking to them about it, we said, well, this doesn't make sense. This is not going to work. This is not operatable. So really understanding that is quite important. But developing the guidance itself is really the beginning. The benefits will be felt after all of you widely adopt it. So one aspect is the technical rigor, making sure the guidance is really strong and meets the sort of principles of good financial reporting, and that's going to be led by CIPFA. The other aspect is this whole stakeholder engagement, making sure that people take it on board and talk about it, and that's going to be led by Humentum, actively reaching out to regulators, accountancy organization, donors, and NPOs to participate in the development process. So how are we going in terms of outreach? You know, this is part of our outreach program. So what we've got here is showing you where people are based. So the little gold balloons are where the tag members are based, you know, Canada, or USA, Europe, Africa, India, etc., where we've got people based. And then we've actually looking at the practitioner advisory group members, and then we've got country champions. So Tejas is the, as I said, the PAG member, and CAP is the country champion for India. So we really want you to engage with these organizations, engage with your country champions, engage with your PAG members, feed into them, feed into Tejas, feed into Noshir, feed in through our website, and make sure that all your voices are heard. Because we really want this to be something which will simplify and build transparency, accountability, and trust in our sector. You know, for me, this is a culmination of sort of most of my working career. You know, I've been working with nonprofits for over 40 years, and I know we're going to get it right, and I know we're going to really adopt it. Back to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Pesh, for that fantastic overview of this amazing project. Allow me to introduce myself briefly, because I'm a new face to most of you, I'm sure. So my name is Samantha Musoke, as you can probably see from my video. I'm from the UK. I trained as a chartered accountant, specializing in charity audits with Mazars in 2000. But then in 2001, I moved to Uganda, and I've been living in Uganda ever since, hence my lovely African name. And I've been working with Mango as an associate, and my whole professional career has been in the NPO sector. It's not as long as Pesh's long career, but all of it, that there is of it, has been in this sector. Training, consulting, auditing, being a CFO, being on boards, that sort of thing. So I've been working with Humentum as an associate since 2004, and then in 2017 I was the regional director for East Africa, and now I have the absolute honour and privilege of being the director for this project for Humentum. So with that said, just so that you know who I am, it'd be great if we can now break into some small groups. Let me explain what we're going to do. We're going to use a Zoom feature called breakout rooms. So some of you might have used this, some of you it might be new. So when I launch these rooms, you'll see an invitation on your screen, which will say join a breakout room. And you should click on that, and that will take you to a new Zoom meeting room with 7 or 8 people. Now, I'll shortly tell you what you need to do when you get there, but I'll also post the questions for you in that new room. So it will work much better if you're able to have your videos and microphones on for these small group chats. If you have any problem, there's a feature to ask the host a question or ask the host to come and join your meeting. So you can do that if you have a problem. When there are 3 minutes left to go, I'm going to post a message to tell you. And then when there's 1 minute left, I'll basically close those rooms and you will automatically be brought back into the main meeting where we are together. So the questions, once you're in your small groups, everyone should just briefly introduce themselves, just 30 seconds, nothing too long, and then nominate a spokesperson among you. And then the first thing to do after that is really just share any questions or comments that have come to your mind while you were hearing Pesh's presentation. What are your reactions? What are your thoughts? What questions are coming up in your mind? Is there anything you'd like clarification about? So just share those among your small group. And then each group should choose whether to discuss question 3 or question 4. You could try and do both, but there probably won't be time to do both. So maybe choose one or the other. So in terms of benefits, maybe you came early at the beginning and you saw the thought experiment. Imagine a world where all NPOs and their stakeholders are using one standard for financial reporting. What would some of the benefits, what would that look like? So that's one of the questions for you to think about, but specifically from an Indian perspective. How might NPOs in India, regulators, auditors, donors, how might you benefit if this guidance is in place and is implemented? So that's the first question. The second one is, what challenges can you see from India's point of view in terms of your participation and possibly adoption and rollout with this project? Are there conflicts with donor reporting requirements, or I don't know, just for you to think and discuss what challenges can you foresee? So I hope that's okay. So you're going to meet each other, get a spokesperson, share questions and comments, and then either the benefits or the challenges. So I'm going to launch these groups now, and hopefully you will enjoy your small group chat. I'll see you in 25 minutes, okay? So you should be seeing right now an invitation on your screen to join a breakout room. So press that. Welcome back, everybody. I think that's, people are being pulled in from their breakout rooms back into the main meeting. It's lovely to see all your faces. For some people that went very well. Had a group of 6 or 7 or 8. For some people it was a bit of a surprise. There were groups of 2. So there was a bit of a mixed experience there. Some people didn't see the invitation to join, so I apologize for that. But hopefully some of you had a great experience. So as we feed back, what we'd like to do is first on the questions and the comments, the reactions that you had to Pesh's presentation. So would somebody like to raise their hand using the function, or you can do it physically if I can see you. If you're a spokesperson, there are quite a lot of you, so you could also just unmute and share. Yes, Mission for Vision. Would you like to share a question or comment? And then we'll have Homia.
Yes. So hi, my name is Judith. We had a group of 5 of us, and all of us agreed that the benefits are going to be really huge, so that we have, you know, better transparency and acknowledgement of donors and even reporting. The challenges would be that in India, it's easier in cities to have this kind of a system in place, but in rural areas and in states where we do not have a capacity of, you know, human resources for accountants, for financial analysis, etc., personnel, there will be challenges there. And we also feel that the process should be simple and easy to understand. That's all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's so important, isn't it? And that capacity issue is key. I should have, I will be mentioning later on, but just to also highlight, the main for this guidance is for it to be relevant to small and medium non-profit organizations. Probably not your tiny micro CBO, but we want it to be simple enough and applicable enough for your normal small to medium sized MPO that it's relevant. So I hear your call for simplicity. That's so important. Haria, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Do you want to come in? A question, comments? Homia, yes, come in. Just unmute yourself. Homia, we can't hear you. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Go.
My name is Homiyar. We were a group of 3 people, and basically we did come around to a conclusion that yes, a standardized system of reporting across the world would be very, very useful. Your accounting and your accounting standards have to be consistent across the world. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of confusion, like we have confusion today in having a separate Indian accounting standard, a separate IFRS, a separate US GAAP, etc. The system of accounting needs to be harmonized and consistent across the world. The reporting can be different for different regions as required by different donors. So while we have the same set of results, the presentation of the results can be different. So while we feel that there would be good to have a standardized system, the standardized system has to allow flexibility in reporting to meet local regulations.
Thank you for that comment. Pesh, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, so we sort of discussed that in our group also. What we found was, I was saying to our group that many of the donors used to ask for individual reports back, both presented separately and also audited separately. So I, as an auditor, might find myself auditing the main financial statements, then auditing a separate donor report for 3 or 4 donors. And we went back to those funders and those donors and we said, look, hang on, we're reporting on the full financial statements. If we actually putting in your grant or your contract within that financial statement, so you can identify it in a note to the accounts, and we've got one common reporting framework, so you can see not just the content, but also the presentation, so the form and the content. And many of them came back and said, fine. So we did ourselves out of a job. We didn't have to do all these separate grant audits, because the donors were able to accept the one set of financial statements. You're of course right, Homiyar. There will be donors who will want some particular aspect of their reporting, or they may find that your organization is too big and their part of their grant is just lost in the main organization. So you'll have to prepare a separate set. But actually, from the point of view of having one, even presentationally, if you can get to the format, a broad format that makes sense for your own organization and which is understood by all the donors and funders, you'll find it's a lot easier.
Thanks, Pesh. I think this is going to be a really big challenge that you've brought up, Homia. The trade-off between the benefits of having one standard presentation that everybody can read and understand and you can train people in, that has benefits. And then there might be trade-offs to, well, that means I can't do this, or I lose some flexibility. So the appropriate level of flexibility is going to be a real challenge for this project. And I think that's why it would be so important to get feedback on the exposure draft and things like that, to get the right, if there are too many choices, you lose the benefits of standardization. If there aren't enough choices, it becomes difficult to implement. So that's going to be a real challenge. Thank you so much. Can I bring in Steve?
Hi. So Sam, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So we also had a very small group. Besides myself, there were just 2 people, but we had a very interesting discussion. Certainly, the need for international standards is very, very desirable. And there is no doubting on that, because among the 2 people who present, one was telling us that there is inconsistency in the donor community in terms of reporting, in the sense that some, let's start with frequency. Some are just happy with an annual report. Some want it every month. Some want it quarterly. Some want half-yearly reports. Some want a combination of all this. So frequency is inconsistent. And more importantly, the format is not consistent. And particularly with regard to how admin cost and salaries are accounted for. Where does salary go? Where does admin go? And this is something where I think a lot of more emphasis is needed when we deal with international reporting standards. There was this case, this lady who was in the group was telling us of her experience with an MNC, a multinational corporation, where they were required to put into their format the financial report over the last not 5, not 3, 10 years. I thought that was a bit much. I mean, on an average, even in India, we look at 3 to maximum of 5 years. But I mean, so we need to also have some kind of standardization if you're going to be dealing with an NGO, I mean, or any kind of implementing agency, if I may use that term. I mean, don't pressurize them. I mean, you can always ask for financial reports for maybe 8 years or 10 years, but to have it converted to their format is, I think, exercise that can be quite draining on the organization. The other thing that came up, and I do completely resonate with that, you want to talk of international standards of reporting, but we have no standardization of reporting internally in India itself. The kind of reporting we do to the charity commissioner is not the same as what we do with income tax. What we do with income tax is not the same as what we do with the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. There is within this country no standardization. What a grant-making Indian foundation wants is very different from what a CSR initiative wants out of us. So I think before we even talk of international standardization, there is no standardization in India itself. And therefore, standardization, usually as we say, charity begins at home. Standardization also needs to begin at home. And perhaps we also look at international standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Noshir, for those great comments. And I think, you know, if those of you that saw the video at the beginning where we had inefficiency, this duplication of reports, inefficiency, and this great onerous burden that's placed on MPOs who spend so much time and money producing reports when we should be having time and energy to focus on doing our missional work. It's so important, isn't it? So we want to find a way to simplify, standardize, and reduce the burden and the inefficiency in the system. That's the goal. I also wanted to speak to your point about admin costs and salaries. I will come along to that in the next section of our presentation, because that's also really important. Thank you, Noshir. Can I bring in Tejas? Tejas, who is one of the members of the Practitioner Advisory Group. Do you want to unmute yourself, Tejas?
Hey, hi. So we had a good group, actually. We had 6 people in the group, which was really nice. And so we had an interesting discussion, and it was very, very good to see the perspectives of all different kinds of people. So Nishit, actually we made a mistake of not deciding the spokesperson in the beginning, which you had told us to, and we didn't do it. So now at the end, we were scrambling to figure out who's going to, talk about it. But so I please invite all of you to add on to if I have missed out on anything. So we had a few points which I will kind of summarize. One was, like Noshir just mentioned, multiple legal compliance reports specifically, which need to be, sorted out before we even talk about a generalized or a standardized reporting for our donors. So that is extremely crucial, especially to this jurisdiction. Second one, and I have actually been a very good, group member and written everything down. So the thing is that, especially in Maharashtra and Gujarat, like many of us are based right now here. In the Charity Commissioner's Office is an extremely huge bottleneck to efficiency, to reporting, to all kinds of things. It's not just not just inefficient. It is also looking out for a lot of extra benefits from NGOs. So we have a lot of issues trying to just report to the Charity Commissioner itself. Getting an okay from them may prove to be the most difficult thing, especially when it comes to this jurisdiction. Also, two people actually brought out the the small and medium-sized NGOs. And Samantha, when we mean small, we mean tiny in India. Okay, we mean like really, really tiny, 2 people, 3 people organizations. And for them, for this to be relevant, we need to figure out, can there be levels of reporting? Can there be a way in which you train them? There's a very important point that somebody brought in about training. Who's going to train these people? Amishi, I think, brought up that point. So all of these things we have discussed. So the challenges, I would think, is jurisdiction, very small organizations, who's going to train, and then there's this very important thing of there's no software for profits, no accounting software for profits in India. Not-for-profits are, using a for-profit methodology and all of that stuff. So how can we integrate that, these standards, at some point into a software so that it becomes easy for NGOs to use this, and makes it more automated, makes it more easy, easier for them, and the reports can come out more effectively. I think this is all. These were the three, 4 points that came out. If I missed anything, please add. Satyam, Amishi, Dr. Benita, Percy, Nishit, and there's one more person. I think I missed the name. Please add if you guys have anything to add to my.
Or you could add in the chat, actually, with the chat, so that we can manage this group time effectively. Thank you so much, Tejas, for sharing that. Couple of points to feedback, and then maybe I'll ask Pesh to comment as well. On the small and medium, so this has been a matter of a lot of discussion at the PAG, at the TAG, and what we have landed on is that we are not able, we don't have the capacity to write something that will suit everybody. There's so much variety and diversity in the sector that it will be impossible to do a one-size-fits-all. What we decided initially is to focus on small, medium, not micro. So the micro, tiny are much more likely to need something perhaps cash-based, perhaps much more simple. What we're aiming to do in this project, as the first go, if you like, maybe in 5 years we'll have a chance to fill in the gaps. But the first focus will be on the smaller and medium-sized MPOs and meeting their needs. That's not to say that the small and micro ones aren't crucially important. And of course, they're the bottom of the pyramid in terms of numbers of them. There's masses of them and they have a huge impact. But in terms of the focus of this project, the decision has been taken, open for consultation, to focus on small and medium. But that's such an important point to adjust. And even the bigger than tiny will need training and capacity building. So that point absolutely is so crucial. I just wanted to mention also that I'm having a lot of interest from software developers. Every month I get somebody reaching out to me saying, oh, can we be involved? We want to be. They are very excited at the idea that there could be one goalpost for them to kick into in terms of how they could set up their software and provide a software that could market this sector or serve this sector. So that's another really important benefit I hope we'll see in coming years, is some better offer of software for the sector. Pesh, do you want to add anything before?
No, we just carry on, I think, and then maybe I'll add some comments at the end when I've heard some more of the others. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Pesh.
There's one comment from, sorry, there's one comment from one member of my group, and I think I missed that out. It's about will multilateral agencies accept this? So, you know, we get a lot of funding from those kind of funders. So yes, that is one point that I missed out. Sorry. Yeah.
Brilliant. And that's so important, isn't it? Because as NPOs, we're quite often at the mercy of what our big donors want. If you've got big funding coming from an international funder, if that is at odds with your regulatory requirements, that's a challenge. So that's precisely why we've got donors like USAID on the practitioner advisory group. We're engaging the donor reference group to try and make sure they're part of this conversation. I don't want to overpromise some magic pill where overnight everybody's going to agree to do everything the same way. I do live in the real world, but the aim is to have those conversations and engage those big players. Most of them are already of the mindset that they realize the current situation, the main people who suffer are the NPOs and their beneficiaries. And there's a recognition that it needs to change, but what that new change will look like is more hard. We're going to get there, but it's not going to be easy. Let me bring in some of our other spokespeople who've been patiently waiting. Natasha Lord, would you like to share key points from your group? Just unmute yourself.
Hi, I think Sandeep is the spokesperson for our group, and I don't think he got invited to speak. So let me.
We can't hear you so well, Natasha. Natasha, your sound is a bit difficult for us. Perhaps, I don't know if there's somebody else from your group who might speak, or maybe just work on it. In the meantime, can we bring in Sandeep Kapila?
Yeah. I'm from the same group, so that's what she was saying. So good. So we are in line. I think a couple of points. One, everyone said yes, even though in India we have different standards, if this becomes an additional standard which is internationally accepted, at least the two NGOs which were in our group said they would want to adopt it so that it lends credibility and supports getting international funding if there are enough funders who want that. So even at the cost of additional work and complexity. The big suggestion, one suggestion that came was that as part of this effort, if there is a standardized software, at least a recommended software, which is provided to NGOs who are complying. So it could be also like an incentive to the NGO to comply with, right? And with a cloud-based solution, it can be probably managed. But yeah, so I think that was one thought which will make it easy for NGOs to implement and adopt these standards and different reports coming out. The question though that was there was around in the advisory groups, are the government people as stakeholders, how are they being engaged? Are they in the advisory group, or is there another way to engage? Because their adoption, particularly in India context, it was very, I think, important, and that was a question that came up in this. And
thank you, Sandeep, for those fantastic comments. At the country level, so the government regulator level is a really important stakeholder group. I should say that as a project, we're currently going through a stakeholder analysis process to identify who the key stakeholders are and build a strategy for each group and subgroup. And we have obviously identified regulators and standard setters as a key group within that. And we've also sub-stratified that for different countries and groups of countries, and we're coming up with strategies for how to do that. We haven't got all the answers yet, but I quite hear you. We've recognized that they're super important, because if they're the ones with the power to say in India, these types of NPOs will be allowed to or required to adopt this guidance. So they have a huge influence over NPOs in their jurisdiction. So I absolutely hear you there. Thank you, Sandeep. Let me bring in Sneha. Ahana. Don't know how to pronounce that, but you're welcome. Come in and share your views from your group.
Okay, it's pronounced as Archana. So actually we had a very different group, like apart from me, though the others in the group were from the financial background, but many of them, like 3 of them, in fact, there were 5 of us, but 3 of them in fact shared that they were more interested in seeing how we could actually have the impact measurement as a part of the financial reporting, because many a times most donors want to see how the financial numbers are linked to the impact which the organization has achieved in that particular year or the past years. So there was a need which was shared where how can it be more controlled? How can we have better reporting or a quantitative measurement of impacts which are standardized across various non-profits and for different type of donors, especially because for many donors, it's difficult to explain when it's really difficult to actually quantify, or when your outcomes are intangible. So that's the word used by one of our members in the group, saying that what if there are intangible outputs, and how do we highlight that separately in our reporting? So these were some of the views which were discussed in our group. But apart from that, what I would like to also personally share is, in fact, when I heard about this particular meeting for today, I was more interested because, as Noshir has rightly echoed, that we are under these various laws, and since we are covered under Charity Commissioner, income tax and all, how do we actually make our accounts more standardized within the country, and then also make it easy for international donors to assign, to understand. More so because even with the size of organizations, Neha, is you won't believe we actually have 4 chartered accountants in the finance team. So we are a 14-member finance team. So you can understand, and this has come up after the CSR came into picture. We have people only looking at budget monitoring and reporting to donors. So the moment of donor sends an email, here we are looking at, okay, can we just look at the utilization, report back to them? Are we following the MOU? Have we contravened anything in the MOU? So that is the kind of pressure which has built on us eventually, that there is the need for having 14-member finance team. And when anyone sees that, they say, why do you need so many people in finance? I mean, and this is something I think is the need of the hour, because if we can make it easier for the donors to understand, and we have a standard of reporting, then I don't think so we need so many people. So I think, and it will help us reduce our cost to a great extent. So those were actually my personal views to this group. Thanks.
Thank you, Sneh. Thank you, Archana. Thank you so much for sharing that. What I'd like to do now, Pesh, I'd like to hand over to you to do some responses to that. But at the same time, I'm going to start sharing my screen for the next section.
Right.
While you do that. Is that okay?
So very quickly, just picking up on this point about multiple reporting requirements and multiple regulators. I think this is a particular challenge for India, because we've got so many silos in our country of different people wanting different things, and we're not totally joined up. So really, I've seen similar situations elsewhere, but probably not as strongly, as badly as I'm seeing in India. What is really important is us in the sector speaking as one voice. So in 1987, in the UK, 6 people who were involved with charity finance got around a table and said, we need to do something about this. We need to get a group together. And we formed the Charity Finance Group. Now, the Charity Finance Group has got over 1,500 organizations as its members now. And we lobby together, we put our views forward together. And we've got the regulators, whether it's the Charity Commission, Companies House, whether it's the accounting bodies, taking heed of what we're saying. I think Tejas has got some group that she's working with, which is similar to that of accounting professionals, but actually bringing people together somehow to push this will get you to the position where, if you're speaking with one voice and using someone like the Institute of Chartered Accountants, then the different parts of the organizations, the different parts of the regulators will have to listen to you. At least I hope they will have to listen to you. So that's really quite important. This other point about admin costs, don't get me started on that. You know, we had this problem in the UK, which you had good expenditure and bad expenditure. If you had expenditure in the field, it was called good expenditure. If you had expenditure in your head office, finance costs, etc., that was bad expenditure. And everyone tried to keep the bad expenditure down. Well, if you look at the financial reporting standard we have at the moment, we don't have admin costs. We don't show them because we say that these are costs which are essential to support our charitable work. And that's been accepted by our regulators, by our tax authorities, and also by our funders. Because as an old group, we came together and we said, you have to have these sort of things, these strange cost ratios, like the cost ratio you've got in the FCRA Act now, about 20, but not more than 20% admin cost. Well, you know, it doesn't work. I'll tell you, as an accountant working in this area for 40 years, it doesn't work. You can't measure an organization's effectiveness and efficiency by its level of admin cost to its total expenditure and things of that kind. You can't measure it by how much is its salary cost. You've got to do what Archana said. You've got to start talking about outputs, outcomes, and impact. And that's what we're talking about with the narrative side of the report, of tying that into it. So I'm really keen, I'm really enthusiastic about hearing from all of you about the sort of issues and challenges. Please do link with me on LinkedIn, join the reporting groups for IFR for NPO. You'll see there's a whole bunch of things. Get engaged with this, and we'll help you build the communities, we'll help you show what other organizations have done to deal with these similar challenges. You can't adopt everything. You will have to adapt things for our own local requirements in India. But at least you've got something. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, because there are many good examples of what's been done elsewhere.
Super. Thank you so much, Pesh. That's a brilliant summary. And just to echo what Pesh has said, thank you so much for those fantastic contributions. If you had something else that was discussed or just into your head, please do put it in the chat, because this will all feed into the project process and everything. So if you other comments or questions, observations, do add them to the chat.
Sam, can I just add one point that came out of our group, which who have been working for a long time with Indian NGOs, didn't know about. It was brought up by one of our group members, that the Institute of Chartered Accountants has already got some guidance for non-profits, some sort of accounting manual for non-profits, but nobody else in our group had heard about it apart from the person who told us about it. And so, Mr. Titus had said that they're already doing a review of that. So in fact, tying that review into what we're doing will really be quite important.
Brilliant, thank you. Mr. Titus, would you share that with Noshir, the country champion for India, and possibly introduce him to the people who are working on it? That would be really, really important to make sure that we can link into that process.
Sam?
Sure. Yeah.
Sam?
Yes.
Sam, can I add here? Sorry.
Yes,
yeah,
Tejas,
go ahead, Tejas, I'll speak after you. Go ahead. Yeah, Tejas.
Sorry to interject here. I had already sent it to you much before when I first interacted with you. That
okay,
was it.
I already have it. Brilliant.
Yeah, and it is getting reviewed for the past 10 years. So I don't know when it'll finally get reviewed and come out or something.
But
So,
more recently, the Institute of Chartered Accountants has also brought out guidelines for financial reporting on CSR, especially with regard to CSR reporting. I'll be happy to share that with you as well.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. So for those aspects that are really India specific, guys, Noshir is your focal point for sort of managing those and making sure that we have them all in one place and share all the knowledge in the sector within India that can be fed to the project. So that's one of the really crucial roles of country champions. And if I can say again, just how grateful we are to Noshir. So if it's okay, I'd love us now to move on to the next phase, because we've still got quite a lot to cover. You're all so keen with all your comments, it's brilliant. So what we're going to do now is move into the next stage. We're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into this consultation phase. There's a consultation process which will be launched in January next year. So we're going to look at who should participate, what does the consultation process look like, what is the consultation paper, and how do you practically respond? So basically, in terms of who, everyone here is invited to participate. We're particularly interested to hear the views of regulators. As you have mentioned, they're such an important stakeholder group. Auditors, funders and MPOs as preparers. All of those groups we're particularly keen to hear from, but nobody is excluded from participating. In terms of the why, and I'm sure you feel this yourselves, without input from India, the cultural context that's relevant in India won't be reflected in this international guidance. So the needs and realities of your stakeholders in India may not be reflected in the proposals and the opinions that move forward. So this is such an exciting opportunity to shape the future. And I hope, future generations will look back and thank you for creating a guidance that's fit for purpose, that really suits your needs. And the other really important benefit, the reason to participate, is to build the credibility of the project. So I think, as Pesh mentioned at the beginning, we've got seed funding, but we're not fully funded. Now, if we get 1,000 responses from 150 countries, that builds the credibility of the project for us to be able to seek further funding to take it all the way through to completion. So there's just a number of different reasons why it would be so beneficial for stakeholders in India to contribute. We want quality, we want quantity. Both of those are really key. So what does this consultation paper actually look like? So the consultation process itself is shaped by this document called the consultation paper. It's still in the final stages of development, and it's likely to end up being around 200 or 250 pages. So I wanted to give you a sense to understand how it's structured so that you can attack it appropriately. So after the executive summary, there's a preface which sets out the objectives of the project, explains who should respond to the consultation paper and how, and that preface is basically short, essential reading. Then the bulk of the paper and all the questions that we're going to be looking for your feedback on are in these two main sections called Part 1 and Part 2. And we're going to look at each of those in a bit more depth shortly. Part 1 looks at sort of landscape level, overview type level issues. And Part 2 takes a closer look at a number of specific accounting and reporting issues. And then there's supplementary information, lots of annexes and tables and references to existing standards, and more context about the background of the project. And there's a glossary, and that's really important because at the moment there's just no standardization about use of terms, which means we could use a term in the paper which somebody reads and thinks, well, I know what that means, but we mean something different. So the glossary is not a new standard of what terms are now globally relevant. It's just to explain what we mean when we put a particular term in the paper, because there's so much variety in the use of terms. So in the next two slides, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive to see how these sections work. So Part 1 of the consultation paper is all about these framework level issues, like how to describe non-profit organizations and who are their stakeholders. It's written in plain English and it's pitched to be accessible to a broad range of stakeholders interested in financial reporting, not just accountants. So it's organized in chapters, and each chapter presents a proposal, and then it ends with a request for general matters for comment. In other words, you're invited to comment on the general level matters that are presented in that chapter. So these questions tend to take the form, do you agree with the proposal? If not, why not? So in that sense, the question is open, you can share your views, but it's structured. You kind of have to read the chapter in order to submit a comment about it. Then Part 2 is more about specific accounting issues, like when to recognize grant income, or whether to disclose gifts in kind, or how to inventory with no sale value, that kind of thing. It's also written in plain English, but it's pitched to be accessible to a more technical audience, familiar with accounting concepts and language. Now here, this part is divided into sections, and each section describes a specific issue and then presents some alternative treatments. It doesn't say which is a preferred treatment, or it doesn't say which one, there's no real preference actually. It's just these are some of the options that exist around the world, and then asks for specific matters for comment. So you're invited to give comment on the specific matters presented in the section. So generally, these questions take the form, do you agree with the way we've described this issue? Do you agree that we've got the right alternatives here at all? If not, why not? And then which alternative would you prefer and why? So again, it's open, but it's structured. And it's necessary to have read the section and the alternatives before you can really meaningfully submit your response. But what this does is it provides the project with really structured responses that can be analysed. And they can also be analysed by region and by stakeholder groups so that we can understand if there's conflicts or strong differences of opinion, we can see where's that coming from and what might be driving it, which will help us in resolution. So let's take a bit of a closer look at the part one, these general matters for comment. So I should say actually before I go on too much further that the questions I'm sharing here are based on what the PAG and the TAG have already discussed, but the document is not yet final. So as a bit of a disclaimer, if the final questions look a bit different, that's part of the process, but we want to familiarize you with the general shape and topic. So in part one, chapter one, it's all about which organizations would be considered non-profit organizations for the purpose of this guidance. And it proposes some broad characteristics. I won't tell you what they are. You have to read the chapter when it comes out in January for that. But then the question is, do you agree with these broad characteristics? You can apply it to yourself. Would I be an NPO in this, if using these criteria? What about my clients? Does that raise some difficulties of interpretation? And then you can mention that in the response. So then chapter 2 is all about the external users, if you like, of NPO financial reports. What are their information needs? So it presents a proposal of what we have thought about what their needs might be, and then it asks, do you agree? Do you agree that their information needs are A, B, C, D? You can see here we've got stakeholders require information about achievement of objectives, going back to your point about mission and outcome and impact, not just numbers. Economy and efficiency, whatever efficiency means, as Pesh said, not necessarily how much admin costs you've got, but can we have a more sensible way of looking at efficiency? Compliance with restrictions and regulations, and longer term financial health. So then the question is, do you agree these are the right things that, that people want information about? If not, what else would you propose? So that's chapter 2, all about users of financial reports. I'd just maybe just add one more thing here. I think it's really interesting that, you know, that we have lots of assumptions coming from the for-profit world. The users are investors and they have these needs. And by doing this and going right back to the fundamentals of report writing, who are users and what their needs are, it means we're not just copy-pasting from a for-profit standard into a non-profit world without going back to the really core considerations of what makes this sector so important and so different from the business sector, which I'm very proud that we're doing this. That's very good. The third chapter is all about aspects of the guidance itself. So it presents some, and one of the questions is about whether that guidance should be accrual-based, or rather the proposal is that it's accrual-based, and the question is what challenges, this has changed I think since we drew up this slide, what might be the challenges of accrual-based guidance, especially for those organizations that run on cash or have cash requirements from their donors, for example. The chapter sets out why we think accrual-based is the most appropriate to meet the project objectives, but then asks for people to share their opinions. We need to hear feedback from the world. So then chapter 4, there are only chapters, don't worry. So chapter 4 is all about the existing financial frameworks, financial reporting frameworks. So firstly, it makes the case that the guidance must draw on an existing international framework or an existing framework. We can't start with an entirely blank piece of paper for many reasons, not least budget and achievability within the time frame, but also international credibility and being consistent with the accounting profession as a whole. We don't need to reinvent wheels that work. We need to adapt them and make sure they're fit for purpose. So there are 3 questions in chapter 4, but one of them is, do you agree with the criteria that we've used to assess the suitability of different frameworks? If not, why not? What other criteria do you believe should be used and why? So the main frameworks we're assessing here are IFRS, IFRS for SME, and IPSAS. Don't worry if you don't know all of this, is part of the problem. Not many people know all of the different frameworks, but you can see the criteria that have been used, and do you think we're judging them on the right thing? And then if you happen to know, you can challenge the scoring as well. And then chapter 5, which is the kind of, it's all driving really towards chapter 5, which is the proposed model for developing the guidance. And the model that we're proposing is to use IFRS for SME as a foundational framework. Because it's small, it's this big, not that big, it's really, they've filtered out the parts of the main IFRS that are much less likely to be relevant to smaller companies and businesses. And it's not updated every 5 minutes. It goes for a good chunk of time, so it gives some stability. So those are the key reasons really why IFRS for SME has been used, notwithstanding that it's a for-profit standard, which is not in its favor, but this is the option that is being presented in the paper. So then the question you're being asked for, do you have any concerns about IFRS for SME as a foundation for this? And if so, what are they? What else would you propose? So this gives us a little snapshot of the consultation part 1, 5 chapters with 2 to 4 questions per chapter. And I hope this gives you a feel for the types of topics and the types of questions. And if you've got a strong opinion about these questions, great, that's super, because we want to hear those. We want to hear your opinions and your perspectives. As I mentioned, in each case, you need to carefully read the chapter and then give your comment or response. And we get this lovely structured information that as a project we can really use to feed into the next phase. Part of the reason this is taking so long, as Pesh said, is that we could have done, you know, could just get 2 people to sit in London and write a document, and it might be very nice, but it wouldn't be relevant for the world. So we need this time of consultation and input and analysis to get something that's really fit for purpose. Right, part 2 of the consultation paper is now taking a deeper dive into some specific accounting issues. Here are some examples, and again, it might not be the final one, but for example, what should the financial statements actually look like? What would be good presentation for the balance sheet to the income statement? Should we have fund accounting or not? What about this all-important narrative report that talks about more about impact and outcomes? What should it include? Classification of expenses. Should this include a line for admin costs? Should it have salaries? You know, what should we do by function or by nature? What would be a useful way for users and for preparers to put their expenses on the front of the income statement? The income recognition is a huge issue. We've got grants with restrictions, with stipulations. We've got based grants. There's a huge variety of accounting treatment for different types of grants. And then there's other types of income like gifts and services in kind. How do we measure those? Sometimes they're very difficult to measure. Do we want to at all? Fundraising costs, grants made, assets that we hold as an organization but don't generate revenue. So how do we do impairment of assets if they don't generate revenue? What's the basis for them being on the balance sheet at all? Same with inventory. And then these last 2 are really key. What is the reporting entity? Am I a branch? What if I've got consortium arrangements? What if the grantee has so much power exerted on it by the donor that really they're a kind of an agent acting on behalf of somebody else rather than acting in their own right? How do we measure that? What's the implication for consolidation? And things like that. So those are some of the kind of more knotty technical techie issues. And what's, you know, you can see the answers to these questions are not obvious. There's no like one obvious answer that's right. And MPOs in different countries have come to their own conclusions. And in countries where there isn't guidance, each auditor and each organization kind of makes up its own thing, which is why we have so much diversity and lack of consistency. It's not lack of capacity often, it's just lack of guidance because there is no one answer. So the principle's the same. Each section presents some information, asks if you agree, and then offers these alternatives for you to say which one you like best. And we will be planning to hold webinars on each of these sort of subtopics, so you can dive a lot deeper into the details and you can share your opinions from, you know, a really informed place, as well as the written document. We'll have videos and things to support that. So how? Hopefully by now you're thinking, I want to participate, I want my voice to be heard. So the consultation paper launch will be in January, probably late January, and there will be a lot of detailed information shared then. So through Noshir, through the project, if you signed up for newsletters, you will be informed about the launch and you can attend some launch events, etc. And there will be a lot more information at that point of precisely how to share your views. But the main method will be through the website, and there'll be various forms and surveys and ways to do it, a variety of ways to meet different people's needs. Crucially, you don't have to respond to everything. If you're interested in part 1, but not in part 2, that's fine. If you are interested in grants, but not in inventory, that's fine. So you can, you know, respond to the bits that you have strong feelings about. The deadlines will be July for part 1 and September for part 2. So there is a bit of time, but don't leave it all to the end. And it'd be good to plan in due time. I think we'll be looking at some country level roundtables mid next year, get people together and have some conversations so that you can submit responses. So this slide is really my single most important message for today that I want you to go away with. Please take this opportunity and use your voice to shape the future of non-profit financial reporting. So I'm going to hand back to Noshir. I think we're going to have some time for some final questions and comments. It could be to do with the consultation process. It could even be additional just based on other things that have come to your mind. Now with this big group, I think again, if we can use the raise hand function, that's quite helpful. So in the participants section, click on participants and then you can raise your hand, or if you can't do that, raise it physically or write in the chat and we can bring you in. Yes, Kenneth D'Souza.
Yes. Kenneth, unmute yourself, please. And Kenneth, unmute yourself. You're on mute. Kenneth, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just trying it. It was a mistake. Just carry on.
Okay, so we know the raise hand function works. That's great. Sundeep, have you raised your hand on purpose?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just had a thought. The process is great. I think the consultative process, just going step by step to make it very practical. I think a thought was that if there could also be a practical pilot with a couple of organizations who may volunteer to do this, I think that would make it very, very real, just as we go through the accounts, etc. I know. I think that was just a thought.
We could explore that. Yes, I think internally, Sam, Pesh and myself will be doing a debrief this Friday. So we'll be taking into account a whole bunch of suggestions that were made. And I thought I saw Arun's hand up. Arun, you wanted to make a point? Arun?
Yes,
yes.
You know, I was strongly feeling about the, you know, the subsequent event of the impact measurement, because that's where we are facing it as a challenge. So in that perspective, yes, I'm more interested in to contribute and then work on whatever way I can do it. So I would like to,
yes.
I thought of starting, I mean, I don't know how effective it will be. There could be some sort of, whether it is a statistical techniques or, you know, we can adopt various methodologies to identify and come to a conclusion. Yes, I will start working on that one and I will share my thoughts on that one as well.
So it's good because, you know, I mean, what is proposed, it has still not become law, but even under CSR yes. Right now, you have 5% set aside as admin cost for the company. But if you are into also monitoring, evaluation and impact assessment particularly, you can set aside as much as 10% for impact Absolutely. Assessment. So there is also going to be some funding available for that, for the company to, so going forward, this is going to be quite important. So thanks for flagging that, Arun. Useful yes. input. Thank you.
Yes.
Do I see any other hand up? Sam, do you see any other hands up? Well, I know it's a little getting late for people. I mean, y'all have all been very patient since 4 o'clock, and I can still see that 73 people are still with us, considering we started out, and until about 10 minutes ago, we had 80. So, but I know that some people have other commitments. So, but unless there are one or two last questions, perhaps we can ask Sam to just do the winding up. So anyone else? Doesn't look like Sam. Maybe you want to just do the winding up.
Thank you, Noshir. So just because you haven't asked a question here doesn't mean obviously the conversation is closed. One of the brilliant ways to take forward the conversation is in the IFR for NPO forum. So it's on the website, and we'll make sure that each of you get a follow-up email that has links to the website. At the website at the top right, you can see forum, and you can join this community forum. It's an online forum. I would like you to wait a couple of weeks because there's still a minor glitch which is being fixed. But when it gets going, it's going to be very good. And Noshir will probably host a group specifically for India where you can talk about India-specific issues. But if you want to talk about general, you can use the general forum. You can meet other stakeholders all over the world. You can friend people. It's a bit like, sort of like Facebook, but specifically for people with an interest in NPO financial reporting. So the other calls to action, please do subscribe to the newsletter. As I said, it's only once every couple of months, and that will just make sure you don't get left out by accident because you don't realize something's happening. The website is very beautiful. We're very proud of it. So please take a look there and have a look around. And then if you're big on social media, it would be really helpful if you could follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, comment and share our posts so that the word gets around there. This project is dependent on people buying in and engaging. So please do that. And then we have a page on our website where people can endorse with either your logo or the name of your organization. If you'd like to do that, you can see how to do that on the website. It doesn't cost anything. It's great for you because it gets your brand up. It's great for us because it shows that stakeholders are engaged in the project. So it's a bit of a win-win. So I think that's it from me to say thank you so much, Noshir, as our country champion, and the amazing ability to bring people together, so many people together in such a short space of time. Thank you for the Center of Advancement of Philanthropy, and thank you, Pesh. Absolutely. So Noshir, I'll leave it to you to give the very final words. Thank you so much.
Well, it's just a pleasant duty to thank all of you, first of all, for sparing your valuable time, and more importantly, giving us some really, really relevant, insightful inputs, which we will be working on. Thank you, Sam, for the opportunity that you have given the Center for Advancement of Philanthropy and myself to be part of this exercise. We've been part of everything with compliance and financial reporting and legal compliance for the last 34 years now. So, I mean, it's all just adding on to what we have been doing. And most importantly, to my dear professional friend and personal friend, Pesh Framjee, for leading us through this evening. I know how busy you are in back-to-back meetings, but for sparing the time, and I know your heart still beats for India. May it keep beating longer and better. Thank you, Pesh. So with that, we can all sign off. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and a good afternoon to our friends in England.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.